The glare of the stage lights was a physical thing, hot and heavy, pressing down on the grand corporate auditorium in downtown Manhattan. They caught the silver in Eleanor Vance's hair, turning her into a living statue of power as her voice, a voice that had built an empire from steel and will, resonated through the cavernous space. "And so, the future of Vance Industries," she began. Her hand raised in a familiar, commanding gesture, "will be secured by—" A gasp. It wasn't hers. It was a collective, sharp intake of breath from 1,000 throats at once, a sound like the sea pulling back before a tsunami. Eleanor's hand, the one that had signed billion-dollar deals and steered the company through recessions, flew to her chest. Her eyes, usually as sharp and focused as a hawk's, widened with a look of pure, unadulterated shock. For one eternal second, she stood frozen, a monument to strength on the verge of collapse. Then, the monument crumbled. She crumpled forward, not in a graceful feint, but in a heavy, graceless fall that ended with a sickening thud, her body a small, broken thing on the vast, empty stage. Silence, a profound, absolute vacuum that sucked all the air from the room. From her seat in the third row, 18-year-old Olivia Miller could only watch, paralyzed. The world had dissolved into a slow-motion nightmare. The vibrant red of the stage carpet seemed to bleed into her vision. The murmur that finally broke the silence was a distant roar, like static in her ears. Security guards rushed the stage, their movements frantic and clumsy. Executives in $1,000 suits leaped to their feet, their faces a mask of panic and predatory opportunity. But Olivia saw none of it clearly. All she could see was her grandmother, her Nana Ellie, the woman who smelled of lavender and old books, the woman who taught her how to bake and how to stand up to bullies, lying unnervingly still under the cruel, indifferent lights. Her high school life, her worries about senior year exams, and the upcoming prom didn't just feel distant. They felt like they belonged to another person in another lifetime. That person had died in the second her grandmother's body hit the floor. Hours later, the world had shrunk to the sterile white walls of a hospital waiting room. The diagnosis was delivered with cold, clinical precision, a massive, unforeseen cerebral hemorrhage. Eleanor Vance was alive, but she was deep in a coma, a state from which she might never return. The words hung in the air, thick and suffocating, and then came the blow that truly shattered Olivia's world. Arthur Finch, the family's stoic, grey-haired lawyer, placed a heavy leather-bound portfolio in her trembling hands. "According to the Vance Industries succession charter, Olivia," he said, his voice devoid of pity, "in the event of incapacitation without a named successor, all authority defaults to the sole living heir. That's you." Olivia stared at him, the words failing to connect. "Me? Hide it. I have a calculus final on Friday." A man standing beside the lawyer, a man with a jaw so tight it looked like it could cut glass, let out a short, dismissive scoff. This was Marcus Thorne, the company's chief operating officer. He looked at Olivia not as a grieving granddaughter, but as a glitch in the system, a problem to be managed. "The market opens at 9:30 a.m. tomorrow," Marcus stated, his voice as cold as the polished marble floors. "If we don't announce a decisive interim leadership, the stock will plummet. We'll be facing a hostile takeover by lunch. We need a decision, tonight." Before Olivia could even process the whiplash of his words, a woman glided forward, a cloud of expensive perfume heralding her arrival. Serafina Reed, the queen of marketing, all silk and sharp smiles, placed a manicured hand on Olivia's shoulder. It felt less like a gesture of comfort and more like a claim of territory. "What Marcus means, dear," she cooed, her voice dripping with condescending sweetness, "is that we need to project strength, a vision. I've already drafted a preliminary announcement featuring a new celebrity partnership. It will signal confidence." The weight of their expectations felt like a physical pressure, crushing the air from her lungs. It's a weight no 18-year-old should have to carry. If you can feel the pressure crushing down on Olivia right now, tap that like button to send her the strength she so desperately needs. They weren't talking to her. They were maneuvering around her, positioning their chess pieces on a board she didn't even know how to play. They moved the meeting to the silent, intimidating Vance Industries boardroom, a place Olivia had only ever seen in magazines. The long mahogany table reflected the grim faces of the two executives like a dark, still lake. Marcus slid a thick, brutally efficient proposal across the polished surface. "The path forward is clear," he declared, tapping a section highlighted in red. "Redundancies. We trim the fat, starting with the underperforming manufacturing lines. A 20% reduction in workforce, effective immediately. It will be painful, but it will stabilize the numbers and show the street we're serious." 20%. Olivia's mind reeled. That wasn't a number on a page. That was David Chen, the foreman who always had a kind word for her when she visited the factory floor as a child. It was Maria, the single mother who worked in packaging, who had told Olivia just last month how proud she was that her son had gotten into college. These were people, families. Serafina pushed her own glossy presentation forward, covered in photos of airbrushed models and A-list actors. "Painful is the wrong message," she countered, her lip curling in distaste at Marcus's proposal. "We need aspiration, not desperation. A multi-million-dollar campaign, a new face for the brand. We create a narrative so compelling that nobody even thinks to look at the numbers." Olivia looked from one proposal to the other. One offered a swift, brutal execution of her grandmother's workforce. The other offered a beautiful, expensive fantasy, while the heart of the company was bleeding out. Both felt like a profound betrayal of everything Eleanor Vance had built. Her grandmother knew the name of every employee on the assembly line. She believed the company was a family, a community, not just a line on a stock ticker. How did I end up here? The question was a whisper, a thought that escaped her lips before she could stop it. How did a high school girl, whose biggest decision yesterday was what color dress to wear to graduation, end up holding the fate of a multi-billion-dollar empire, the fate of thousands of families in her hands? Marcus Thorne looked at her, his eyes holding a flicker of something she recognized from the sharks at the aquarium. A cold, predatory assessment. "Your grandmother should have named a successor," he said, the implication clear. "This is her fault. You are merely the consequence." They left her there alone in the cavernous boardroom, with the two proposals sitting on the table like a death sentence, and its equally grim alternative. The only other presence was a grand oil painting of Eleanor, her eyes seeming to follow Olivia with a mixture of pride and unbearable expectation. The clock on the wall, a heavy, ornate piece, ticked with the finality of a bomb counting down. Each tick was a second closer to 9:30 a.m. Each tick was a second closer to a decision that felt utterly, completely impossible. Olivia stared at the imposing corporate documents, the dense paragraphs of legal and financial jargon blurring through her tears. The weight of her grandmother's legacy wasn't an honor. It was a crushing, suffocating burden, and she had until morning to decide how to bear it without breaking completely. The sterile antiseptic scent of the hospital filled Olivia Miller's lungs, a stark and cruel contrast to the faint, familiar perfume of lavender and old books that always clung to her grandmother. Hours had bled into one another, marked only by the rhythmic, monotonous beep of the heart monitor that tethered Eleanor Vance to the world of the living. Olivia sat on a stiff, unforgiving chair, her small hand clutching Eleanor's, which felt unnervingly cool and still. The dazzling lights of the auditorium, the collective gasp, the horrifying sight of her grandmother crumpling to the stage, it all played on a merciless loop in her mind, each replay sharper and more painful than the last. She was just a girl who had been worrying about her calculus final 24 hours ago. Now, a stack of corporate documents thick enough to be a textbook sat on the small table beside her, their dense legal language a monument to her inadequacy. The weight of Vance Industries, of thousands of jobs, of a legacy forged over 50 years, was a physical pressure on her chest, making it hard to breathe. She stared at her grandmother's face, a mask of serene stillness that betrayed none of the fire that usually burned in her eyes. "Grandma," Olivia whispered, her voice cracking in the oppressive quiet. "What do I do? They're all talking at me, but I can't hear anything. Marcus wants to fire half the factory. Serafina wants to hire a movie star we can't afford. They look at me and they don't see me. They just see a problem, a child in a chair that's too big for her." She squeezed Eleanor's hand, a desperate plea for a response that she knew was impossible. The silence that answered was vast and empty. Her solitude was broken by a soft knock. A nurse entered, offering a sad, professional smile. "Honey, some board members are in the waiting area. They're very insistent." Olivia's stomach tightened into a cold knot. She didn't want to see them. She wanted to build a fortress around this room and stay until Eleanor woke up and made the world right again. But that wasn't an option. Taking a deep breath, she stood, her legs stiff, and walked out into the harshly lit corridor. The waiting area was a tableau of corporate anxiety. 3 men in impeccably tailored suits stood in a tight huddle, their hushed tones stopping the moment they saw her. They were the vultures she'd seen circling all day. They straightened their ties, their expressions shifting to a practiced, condescending sympathy. "Olivia," one of them said, his name a forgotten casualty of the day's trauma. "We just wanted to express our deepest concerns and offer our guidance." Guidance. They meant instructions. They meant pressure. As they spoke, their words blurring into a meaningless drone of fiscal responsibility and shareholder value, Olivia's gaze drifted down the hall. Through the partially open door of a private consultation room, she saw Marcus Thorne. He was on his phone, his back to her, but his voice carried, sharp and clear. "No, the girl hasn't decided anything yet," Marcus said, his tone dripping with contempt. "She's sitting in there holding the old woman's hand, probably praying for a miracle. Pathetic. Just be ready. The moment I get the word, we initiate the downsizing protocols. We can cut 1/3 of the assembly line by the end of the week. Dead weight, all of them. It's simple math." Simple math. Olivia felt a surge of cold fury. He was talking about people. He was talking about David Chen, a man she'd met once at a company picnic, who had worked at the factory since he was her age. He had shown her a picture of his own granddaughter. He wasn't dead weight. He was a human being. Before she could process the sting of Marcus's cruelty, she heard another voice, this one laced with theatrical frustration. It was Serafina Reed, pacing near the elevators, her designer heels clicking an angry rhythm on the linoleum. "It's a brand catastrophe," Serafina lamented into her own phone. "And this absurd idea from that little assistant, Chloe or whatever her name is. Real people? Using factory workers in our campaigns, can you imagine? It's utterly déclassé. We need glamour, aspiration, not authenticity. Authenticity doesn't sell a $500 handbag." The words struck Olivia with the force of a physical blow. They weren't just dismissing her, they were dismissing everyone her grandmother had built the company for and with. They saw the employees as numbers on a spreadsheet and customers as fools to be dazzled. The very soul of Vance Industries, the integrity Eleanor had prized above all else, was being dissected and discarded by the very people entrusted to protect it. Her heart ached with a profound sense of betrayal, for Eleanor, for the company, and for every single employee who was about to be sacrificed on the altar of profit and vanity. This wasn't leadership, it was a feeding frenzy. Overwhelmed, she turned without a word to the waiting board members and walked back into the quiet sanctuary of her grandmother's room. The rhythmic beep of the monitor was a steady heartbeat in a world gone mad. She sank back into the chair, the cold fury giving way to a wave of desperate grief. Tears she hadn't allowed herself to shed now streamed down her face. She rested her head on the edge of the bed, her cheek against the starched white sheet, and sobbed. "I can't do this, Grandma," she whispered through her tears. "I'm not you. I don't know how to be ruthless like Marcus, or dazzling like Serafina. They're going to tear it all apart. Everything you built, everything you loved. They're going to destroy it, and they'll smile while they do it. Please, just give me a sign. Anything. Tell me I'm not alone in this." She held her grandmother's hand, pouring all her fear, her confusion, and her desperate love into that single point of contact. The room was silent, save for her quiet sobs and the steady electronic pulse of the machine. Time seemed to stop. The world outside, with its sharp suits and sharper tongues, faded away. It was just her and Eleanor, granddaughter and grandmother, adrift in a sea of uncertainty. And then she felt it. It was faint, almost imperceptible, like the flutter of a butterfly's wing, a gentle pressure against her palm. Olivia's breath hitched. She went perfectly still, her heart hammering against her ribs, convinced she had imagined it. But then it came again, a fraction stronger this time, a weak but unmistakable squeeze. Eleanor's frail fingers, which had been limp and lifeless for hours, were consciously, deliberately closing around hers. Olivia's eyes shot wide open, staring at their joined hands. It wasn't a spasm. It wasn't a reflex. It was an answer. It was a current of strength flowing from the silent matriarch into the terrified girl. It was a silent, powerful affirmation. It didn't say, "Do what Marcus wants." It didn't say, "Listen to Serafina." It said, "I am here. Trust your heart. Trust what you know to be right." A profound calm washed over Olivia, extinguishing the fire of her panic. The tears stopped. She lifted her head, her gaze clear and focused for the first time all day. She looked at Eleanor's peaceful face and saw not a victim, but a queen who had just passed her scepter. The cynical voices of the executives were still echoes in her mind, but they had lost their power. They were just noise. The signal, the only one that mattered, had come through loud and clear. She now carried not just the weight of her grandmother's legacy, but the very spark of it. She squeezed back, a silent vow passing between them. The clock on the wall showed it was nearly 3 in the morning. The decision had to be made in just a few hours, and for the first time, Olivia Miller knew exactly what she was going to do. The squeeze of her grandmother's hand was a phantom pressure that lingered long after Olivia Miller had left the sterile, hushed environment of the hospital. It was not a command spoken in words, but a current of energy that had traveled from Eleanor's still form into her own, a silent mandate that resonated deeper than any corporate directive. Trust your heart. It was a simple phrase, one found on greeting cards and in sentimental movies, but in the white-walled silence of that room, it had felt like the most profound and actionable advice in the world. Back in the cold, glass and steel heart of the Vance Industries skyscraper, that feeling was already beginning to fray under the assault of reality. Driven by a desperate, newfound purpose, Olivia bypassed the executive floor entirely. The silent command hadn't been to trust Marcus Thorne's brutal spreadsheets or Serafina Reed's glossy presentations. It was to trust her heart, and her heart told her that the soul of Vance Industries wasn't in the boardroom. It was somewhere deeper, somewhere louder, somewhere real. She remembered hushed whispers from the day before, names dismissed by Serafina during a rant about budget inefficiencies, a foreman, a creative assistant. Voices from the engine room, not the bridge. Following a thread of intuition, Olivia requested the employee directory from a startled administrative assistant and found the names David Chen, assembly line foreman, floor 2. Chloe Davis, creative assistant, marketing, floor 17. Her descent to the factory floor felt like traveling to another country. The plush carpets and silent, climate-controlled air of the executive levels gave way to polished concrete, the scent of machine oil, and a deafening, rhythmic symphony of industry. Here people moved with purpose, their faces focused, their hands skilled. No one paid her any mind. She was just a girl in jeans and a simple sweater, an anonymous figure lost in the organized chaos. She found David Chen not in an office, but standing beside a stalled conveyor belt, his brow furrowed in concentration as he spoke quietly to a young worker, his hands demonstrating a delicate adjustment to a piece of machinery. He was a man in his late 50s, his face lined with the quiet patience of someone who had spent a lifetime solving practical problems. His company-issued polo shirt was clean but faded, a testament to its long service. "Mr. Chen," Olivia's voice was barely a whisper above the din. David Chen turned, his expression shifting from focused concern to mild surprise. He didn't recognize her. To him, she was just a visitor, out of place. "Can I help you, miss?" I'm Olivia Miller, Eleanor Vance's granddaughter." The change in his demeanor was instantaneous. A wall of formality went up, his posture straightening. He wiped a hand on his trousers before offering it to her, a gesture of ingrained respect. "Miss Miller, I'm so sorry about your grandmother. We are all praying for her." His words were genuine, his sympathy unforced. It was the first time all day someone had spoken of Eleanor as a person, not a problem to be solved. Thank you, Mr. Chen. I was told you had some ideas about the inventory problem, about the Mother's Day launch. A flicker of something, was it disappointment? Resignation? Crossed his face before he carefully masked it. Just some thoughts from the floor, Miss Miller. Nothing for the executive level to worry about. I'm worried about it, Olivia insisted, stepping closer, forcing him to meet her gaze. Please, tell me. Hesitantly at first, then with a growing confidence born from decades of expertise, David Chen began to speak. He led her away from the main line to a quieter corner, near towering shelves stacked high with unsold products, beautifully packaged lotions, soaps, and candles that represented millions of dollars in static assets. Mr. Thorne sees this as waste, David began, gesturing to the silent mountain of merchandise. He wants to liquidate it for pennies on the dollar, fire the seasonal staff, cut hours for the rest of us. He calls it trimming the fat. David Chen paused, his gaze sweeping over the products with an almost paternal affection. But this isn't fat, Miss Miller. This is our work. It's good work. He then laid out his idea, not with charts and graphs, but with the simple, powerful logic of a craftsman. People love surprises, and people love value. We have thousands of these items, all different scents, different collections. What if we don't sell them as individual products? What if we sell the experience? We take this inventory, we create curated Vance mystery boxes, a Mother's Day surprise box, a summer relaxation box. We can build a simple website, market it on social media. Low cost, high engagement. We clear the inventory, we generate immediate revenue, and, he said, his voice lowering with the weight of his final point, we keep every single person on this floor employed. We could even hire more people to handle the packing and shipping. Olivia stared at him, then at the boxes. It was so simple, so elegant, so human. It turned a problem into an opportunity, waste into excitement. It wasn't about ruthless cuts. It was about creative transformation. It was an idea that could only have come from someone who understood the product, the people who made it, and the customers who would love it. Why hasn't anyone listened to this? Olivia asked. Her voice filled with a dawning indignation. David Chen gave a small, sad smile. On floor 32, Miss Miller. They don't listen to voices from floor 2. Her next stop was floor 17, the marketing department. It was a world of bright colors, open-plan desks, and the low hum of creative energy. Yet it was dominated by the imposing glass walls of Serafina Reed's corner office. Olivia found Chloe Davis at a small cubicle tucked away in a far corner, surrounded by sketches, color swatches, and printouts of social media analytics. Chloe was young, maybe only a few years older than Olivia, with bright, intelligent eyes that lit up with a nervous energy when Olivia introduced herself. Miss Miller, Wow, it's an honor. I am so terribly sorry about your grandmother. She's an icon. Thank you, Chloe. I need your help. Serafina Reed wants to hire a mega influencer for a $15 million campaign to save the brand's image. Chloe visibly winced, as if the words themselves had physically struck her. $15 million, she repeated, her voice barely a whisper. For what? A few glossy photos that no one will believe. Our engagement is at an all-time low because our customers feel we're not authentic anymore. They see a mega celebrity holding a bottle of our lotion, and they know that person has never used it in their life. It's a lie, and consumers are tired of being lied to. Her passion overrode her nervousness, words tumbling out in a rush. What would you do? Olivia asked, leaning against the cubicle wall, utterly captivated. Chloe took a deep breath and turned to her computer screen. She pulled up a folder filled with candid photographs. They weren't professional shots, they were snapshots of Vance Industries employees. A woman on the assembly line, her face creased in a proud smile as she inspected a finished product. A father in the shipping department, laughing with his son during a family day event. A young chemist in the lab, her eyes sparkling with discovery. This is our brand, Chloe said, her voice trembling with conviction. Not some celebrity who doesn't care about us. It's the people, the real people who pour their lives into this company. My idea, my pitch that got laughed out of the room, was to turn the cameras around. We feature our own employees and their families in our next campaign. We tell their stories. We show the world the real faces of Vance Industries. We call it the Vance family. It's honest. It's real. It would cost next to nothing compared to Serafina's plan, and the emotional connection, it would be priceless. Olivia looked from the authentic, joyful faces on the screen to Chloe's earnest, hopeful expression. Here it was again, an idea rooted in dignity, in respect, in seeing the value that was already there, but had been rendered invisible by corporate ego. It was the perfect complement to David Chen's plan. One saved the jobs, the other celebrated the people who held them. Armed with these two revolutionary common-sense proposals, Olivia felt a surge of hope. She requested a brief, final consultation with Marcus Thorne and Serafina Reed in a small conference room, framing the ideas as hypothetical possibilities she was exploring. The reaction was swift and utterly damning. Marcus Thorne barely looked up from his tablet. "Mystery boxes," he scoffed, a sneer twisting his lips. "It sounds like a flea market gimmick. Our brand is premium, Miss Miller, not a garage sale. The projections are clear. We need to cut operational drag by 35%. That means inventory liquidation and headcount reduction. It's clean, it's efficient, it's the only language the street understands." Serafina Reed was even more dismissive. She let out a short, sharp laugh that sounded like breaking glass. "Real people? Darling, no one wants to see real people. They want to see aspiration, glamour. We put a factory worker on a billboard and our brand value will plummet overnight. It's marketing 101. You sell the dream, not the dreary reality." She looked at Olivia with an expression of pitying condescension. "You're young. You don't understand how this world works. Leave the big decisions to the professionals who do." Their unified disdain, their complete inability to see the humanity and brilliance in the ideas, was the final fissure. It cracked Olivia's remaining faith in the established order wide open. They weren't saving the company. They were gutting it, stripping it of its soul for the sake of appearances and short-term gains. They didn't see employees. They saw headcount. They didn't see customers. They saw demographics. They didn't see her grandmother's legacy. They saw a quarterly report. The clock on the wall seemed to tick louder, each second a hammer blow counting down to the 9 a.m. assembly. The immense pressure of defying them, of standing before the entire board and C-suite and choosing a foreman and an assistant over a COO and a chief of marketing, was terrifying. It was corporate suicide. It was an act of naive folly, just as they would call it. But as she stood to leave the conference room, the phantom pressure returned to her hand. Trust your heart. Her heart wasn't telling her to be reckless. It was telling her that David Chen's quiet wisdom and Chloe Davis's passionate authenticity were worth more than all of Marcus Thorne's spreadsheets and Serafina Reed's hollow glamour combined. Her grandmother had built an empire, yes, but she had done it by creating things of value, by employing people with dignity. That was the legacy. Olivia walked out of the room without another word. The condescending smiles of Marcus and Serafina followed her out the door, both of them confident the little girl had learned her lesson. They had no idea she had. Alone in the elevator, ascending back to the top floor, Olivia looked at her reflection in the polished steel doors. The nervous, frightened girl from the day before was gone. In her place was someone else, her eyes clear, and her jaw set with a quiet, unshakable resolve. She had made her final, momentous decision. She knew it would create an explosion, a shockwave that would rock the company to its foundations, and for the first time, she was ready to be the one to light the fuse. The cavernous boardroom on the 90th floor of Vance Tower was a cathedral of silent, predatory expectation. Polished mahogany gleamed under recessed lighting, reflecting the severe, unsmiling faces of the board members arranged around its colossal length. Each person in that room, from the silver-haired chairman of the board to the youngest, hungriest vice president, wore their ambition like a tailored suit. They were sharks in a glass tank, circling, waiting for the blood in the water. At the head of the table, in the grand leather chair that had belonged to Eleanor Vance for 50 years, sat Olivia Miller. She looked impossibly small, a fawn surrounded by wolves. The air, thick with the scent of expensive cologne and simmering condescension, was a physical weight on her shoulders. Every eye was fixed on her, the collective gaze a laser of scrutiny. They were expecting a capitulation, a rubber stamp on the foregone conclusion that was Marcus Thorne. They saw a grieving, terrified 18-year-old girl, and they were ready to devour her. What they didn't see was the memory of a faint, fragile pressure against her palm, the silent thunder of her grandmother's last command, "Trust your heart." Marcus Thorne, seated to her right, offered a smile that was all teeth and no warmth. "Olivia," he said, his voice a smooth, condescending purr, "we all appreciate you taking this on. We know it's difficult. But time is of the essence. My proposal is on the table, a necessary, if painful, restructuring to stabilize the ship." He gestured dismissively towards a thick, leather-bound document in front of her, a Bible of corporate brutality filled with spreadsheets detailing the termination of thousands of lives. To her left, Seraphina Reed adjusted the cuff of her silk blouse, her expression one of bored superiority. "Or," she interjected, her voice dripping with artificial glamour, "we could make a real splash. The celebrity campaign I outlined will change the narrative entirely. Perception is reality, after all." Olivia let their words hang in the suffocating silence. She looked from Marcus's cold, calculating eyes to Seraphina's vain, empty ones. They were two sides of the same worthless coin. She took a slow, deliberate breath, her fingers tracing the rim of a water glass. The slight tremor in her hands was a secret she kept for herself. She thought of David Chen's worn, calloused hands, gesturing with quiet pride as he explained his idea, of Chloe Davis's bright, passionate eyes as she defended the dignity of real people. "Thank you both," Olivia began. Her voice was softer than she intended, almost a whisper, and a few of the board members exchanged smug, knowing glances. Marcus's smile widened. He was leaning back in his chair, already tasting victory. "Thank you for your proposals," Olivia continued, her voice gaining an unexpected firmness, a clear, resonant tone that cut through the room's thick atmosphere. "I have spent the entire night reviewing them. I have also reviewed the state of the company, the morale of our employees, and the legacy my grandmother, Eleanor Vance, spent her life building." She paused, letting the weight of that name settle over them. A few of the older members shifted uncomfortably. "Mr. Thorne, your plan is efficient. It would cut costs immediately." She looked directly at him, her gaze unwavering. "It would also cut the heart out of this company. It would turn Vance Industries into just another faceless machine that values profit over people. My grandmother never built a machine. She built a family." Marcus's smile faltered, replaced by a flicker of irritation. "And Ms. Reed," Olivia said, turning her head slightly, "your campaign is glamorous. It would certainly get attention." She let the faintest hint of steel enter her voice. "But it is a hollow echo. It celebrates a fantasy while ignoring the very real. Very dedicated people who make this company run. It is a lie, and Vance Industries does not lie." Seraphina's perfectly painted lips tightened into a thin, angry line. The condescension in the room was rapidly curdling into confusion. This was not the script they had written. Olivia pushed both of their ostentatious proposals toward the center of the table with a quiet finality. "Therefore," she announced, her voice now ringing with a conviction that shocked them all into silence, "I will not be accepting either of your plans." A collective, sharp intake of breath. The silence that followed was no longer predatory, it was stunned. "I have made a different decision," Olivia said, rising slowly from her chair. She was no longer a small girl swallowed by her grandmother's throne. She was its rightful heir. "Effective immediately, I am appointing interim co-leaders to steer Vance Industries through this crisis." A murmur rippled through the room. This was it, the moment of truth. They leaned forward, their minds racing. Who would it be? Someone from finance? A seasoned veteran from the board? "Please welcome," Olivia declared, her voice clear and unwavering, "your new leadership." She looked past the sea of expensive suits toward the double doors at the far end of the boardroom. As if on cue, they opened. Two figures stood there, blinking in the bright, intimidating light, looking as out of place as sparrows in an eagle's nest. "Mr. David Chen," Olivia announced. The name meant nothing to them. They looked at each other, brows furrowed. Who? And Ms. Chloe Davis. More blank stares. The confusion was now palpable, bordering on comical. Olivia let the moment hang, twisting the knife of their ignorance. "For those of you who have not had the pleasure," she said, her voice laced with an irony so sharp it could draw blood. "Mr. Chen is our assembly line foreman from the main manufacturing plant. He has been with this company for 27 years, and Ms. Davis is a creative assistant from the marketing department." The dam of their composure broke. A gasp, loud and sharp, came from a woman in the corner. It was followed by a choked, derisive laugh from a man near Marcus. Then the room erupted. It was not a roar of anger, not yet. It was a symphony of incredulous, mocking disbelief. Snickers echoed off the mahogany. Indignant murmurs swelled into a furious buzz. "Is this a joke?" a board member sputtered, his face turning a blotchy red. "She's putting a factory worker in charge. And an assistant," Serafina Reed hissed, her voice a venomous whisper. "An intern. She's insulting us." But all eyes were on Marcus Thorne. His face, just moments ago, a mask of smug certainty, had contorted into a canvas of pure, undiluted rage. The muscles in his jaw were clenched so tightly, they looked like they might snap. A thick vein pulsed violently in his temple. He slammed his fist down on the table, the sound cracking through the room like a gunshot. "Absolutely not," he bellowed, rising to his feet, his towering frame casting a shadow over the table. "This is insanity. It is the naive, sentimental folly of a child playing dress-up in her grandmother's office. You cannot be serious, Olivia. This is a multi-billion-dollar corporation, not a high school project." Several other board members stood in solidarity, their faces masks of outrage. "He's right," one of them shouted. "This is a betrayal of corporate governance, a betrayal of the shareholders. We will resign, all of us." The threats hung in the air, heavy and violent. The room was a pressure cooker of entitlement and fury. They expected Olivia to shrink, to cry, to apologize, and retract her ludicrous decision. Instead, she stood her ground. She did not raise her voice, she did not flinch. She simply held Marcus Thorne's furious gaze with a quiet, unshakable defiance. The noise slowly died down as they all stared, mesmerized by this sudden, inexplicable transformation. The frightened girl was gone. In her place stood a queen. "This is not a game, Mr. Thorne," Olivia said, her voice chillingly calm. "This is the future of Vance Industries, a future where we value the 27 years of loyalty and practical genius of a man like David Chen over the ruthless ambition that sees people as numbers on a spreadsheet. A future where we value the authentic vision and passion of a woman like Chloe Davis over the shallow, expensive illusions you tried to sell me." Her eyes swept across the room, meeting the gaze of every single outraged executive. "You see a factory worker and an assistant. I see the heart and soul of this company. You see a naive girl. I see my grandmother's legacy, and I will not allow you or anyone else to destroy it with your greed and your blindness." She took a step forward, her presence suddenly filling the room. "My decision is final. Mr. Chen and Ms. Davis will lead. You will support them, or you will tender your resignations. The choice is yours." The silence that fell was absolute, broken only by the sound of their own staggered breathing. They stared at her, this 18-year-old girl who had, in the space of 5 minutes, dismantled their entire world. She had taken command. She had made a decision that no one in that room had the courage or the vision to make. The shock was no longer about her choice of leaders. It was about her. The girl they had dismissed, the pawn they had planned to manipulate, had just checkmated them all. And in that deafening quiet, as David Chen and Chloe Davis stepped fully into the room, their expressions a mixture of terror and determination, everyone knew that nothing at Vance Industries would ever be the same again. The weeks that followed the assembly were a crucible. The initial shockwave of Olivia Miller's decision curdled into a storm of corporate outrage and public ridicule. Financial news outlets ran scathing editorials, dubbing her the teen tyrant and predicting the swift and brutal demise of Vance Industries. Marcus Thorne and Serafina Reed, though stripped of their authority, remained at the company, their presence a constant simmering threat, their whispers in the hallways like poison, certain they were merely waiting for the inevitable collapse to reclaim their thrones. But outside the glass tower of the executive suites, something entirely unexpected began to happen. Something real. David Chen's mystery boxes, named the Vance Legacy Chest, launched on a Tuesday morning with little fanfare and a mountain of skepticism. By Tuesday afternoon, they had sold out. A trickle of social media posts became a flood. People weren't just unboxing products. They were unboxing stories. A woman found a vintage locket, a forgotten design from 30 years prior, that was identical to one her mother once owned. A young man discovered a beautifully crafted shaving kit, a product line discontinued for being unprofitable, and his video review garnered 2 million views overnight. David's genius was not just in clearing inventory. It was in understanding that buried in the forgotten stock was the very soul of the company, decades of craft, passion, and history. He had turned dead weight into treasure, and in doing so, created a direct, emotional line from the factory floor to the customer's heart. Simultaneously, Chloe Davis's Faces of Vance campaign began to appear. There were no celebrities, no impossibly glossy models. Instead, there was Maria, a single mother from the packaging department, her face etched with a quiet pride as she spoke about the quality control she ensured for every item. There was 70-year-old Samuel, a machinist on the verge of retirement, his calloused hands demonstrating the intricate workings of a machine he had operated since he was a boy. The campaign was raw, honest, and devastatingly effective. It didn't sell a product, it sold integrity, it sold community. Sales, which had been in a nosedive, began to stabilize, then climb, then soar with a velocity that left analysts speechless. The numbers were undeniable. Profits were up by 300%. The employees Marcus had slated for termination were not only rehired, but given raises and positions in a new profit-sharing program David had designed. The factory, once a place of tense, anxious labor, became a hub of innovation. The local town, which had braced for the economic impact of mass layoffs, was now thriving, with Vance Industries investing in community projects and local sourcing. The change was so profound, so complete, that the murmurs of derision in the corporate hallways faded into a stunned, grudging silence. Marcus and Serafina watched from the sidelines, their faces masks of disbelief, as the two people they had dismissed as insignificant rewrote the very definition of success. 3 months after the fateful assembly, Vance Industries held a celebration. It wasn't in a lavish ballroom or a 5-star hotel. It was held in the cavernous, revitalized main warehouse, the air thick with the smell of fresh paint and possibility. String lights were draped between steel beams, and tables were laden not with champagne and caviar, but with food from local caterers. The guests were the employees and their families, the true faces of Vance. Olivia moved through the crowd, no longer the terrified girl in the boardroom, but a young woman who had found her footing in the eye of a hurricane. She listened as David Chen, a man who once struggled to be heard, addressed the cheering crowd with a quiet, powerful grace. She watched as Chloe Davis, once an overlooked assistant, unveiled a new scholarship program for employees' children, her voice ringing with a passion that was infectious. This was it. This was the legacy her grandmother had truly built, a legacy not of stock prices and market shares, but of people. As the applause for Chloe's announcement reached a crescendo, a hush fell over the warehouse. It started at the entrance and spread like a wave, silencing the music, the laughter, the celebration. Every head turned. Standing in the doorway, framed by the cool night air, was Eleanor Vance. She was not in a wheelchair, she was not frail. She stood tall, her silver hair immaculate, her eyes sharp and analytical, sweeping across the transformed space. A silent electric current passed through the room. She began to walk, her steps deliberate and steady. She passed the displays showcasing the legacy chests, her fingers brushing lightly against the reclaimed wood. She paused before a large screen looping the Faces of Vance campaign, her gaze lingering on the proud, honest faces of her employees. She observed the revitalized machinery, the palpable sense of hope in the air, the genuine smiles. She was not just looking, she was testing, measuring, absorbing the profound change her granddaughter had wrought. Finally, she reached the small stage where Olivia, David, and Chloe stood, frozen. Eleanor's eyes met Olivia's, and in that gaze, Olivia saw not just the grandmother she loved, but the matriarch, the formidable architect of an empire. The silence stretched, thick with 1,000 unspoken questions. Then Eleanor Vance smiled, and she spoke, her voice as clear and commanding as it had been on the day she collapsed. "Many of you believe you witnessed a tragedy 3 months ago," she began, her voice carrying effortlessly through the cavernous space. "You believed you were watching an empire crumble under the leadership of a frightened child. You were wrong." She let the words hang in the air. "What you witnessed was not a collapse, it was an experiment." A collective gasp rippled through the crowd. "For years," Eleanor continued, her eyes finding Marcus Thorne and Seraphina Reed, who had gone pale in the crowd, "I watched a sickness grow within my company. A sickness of ego, of greed, of valuing titles over talent and profits over people. I knew that if I simply named a successor from that world, the sickness would continue. I needed a cure. I needed someone whose heart was not yet corrupted, someone who could see the value in a foreman with 25 years of loyalty and an assistant with a brilliant, empathetic idea." She turned her gaze back to Olivia, a deep, overwhelming pride shining in her eyes. "My collapse was a test, a carefully orchestrated, calculated risk, known only to myself and my most trusted physician. I had to remove myself from the board to see who my people truly were. I had to see who would fight for the soul of this company when they thought no one was watching. I didn't choose Olivia because she is my blood. I chose her because I knew she was the only one brave enough to listen. The only one who would measure worth not in dollars but in dignity." The revelation struck the room like lightning, recontextualizing everything. Olivia's terrifying choice was not an act of naive folly. It was an act of profound courage that had passed the ultimate test. Eleanor stepped forward and took Olivia's hand in one of hers, and David's and Chloe's in the other, raising them for all to see. "This is the new leadership of Vance Industries," she declared, her voice booming with conviction. "A leadership built not on hierarchy, but on humanity. A leadership that has proven, beyond any doubt, that the most profitable strategy in the world is not cutting costs but cultivating people." The warehouse erupted in a deafening roar of applause, a cathartic release of emotion and gratitude. As Olivia looked out at the sea of cheering faces, tears finally streaming down her own, she understood. True wealth was never about the numbers on a balance sheet. It was about the lives you could change, the community you could build, and the enduring power of seeing the extraordinary value hidden in ordinary people. Sometimes, all it took was for one person to be brave enough to look.